What's up guys, Jeff Cavalier, ATHLEAN-X.com. So what is the perfect volume when you're trying to build muscle? See, depending upon who you listen to or who you watch or who you read, you might have a very different answer. You might say something like 6 sets or 8 sets per week is enough to build muscle per muscle group. Or you might say 40 sets is what you need to build muscle per muscle group per week. That's a big discrepancy. But what I want to do here today is try to give you some important questions to ask yourself so that you can actually come up with what the perfect volume is for you. Because you see, there is no exact perfect number. I could just say within a couple words things that will separate perfect for one person versus the other. Are you beginner or advanced? Right there, I will have very different volumes likely. Are you using steroids or not? Right there, I would have very different volumes for the people who are using and not using. So what we need to do instead is a couple things. And I'm going to map this out for you. Again, I want you to be able to walk away from this video with a much better understanding of where you sit and what you need to do. So we have on this scale over here, we have the intensity arm, right? And down here, we have volume. And interestingly, I also put in parentheses here time, because it takes a certain amount of time to produce or perform the volume that rises, and as that volume rises, the time it takes to do it is going to go up, and your time spent either in the gym in that one workout or at least across a week, if that's the given time we're going to measure here, is going to go up. So time is very much closely linked to volume. So you can see that if we were to do something incredibly high intensity, right, very, very, very high intensity, up in this range over here, we wouldn't have to spend a whole hell of a lot of time doing it. In other words, we wouldn't have to put a lot of volume in there, sets and reps, at that high intensity to get the training effect that we're looking for, or the ability to build muscle. And you can go back to some of the approaches of guys like Mike Mentzer, who I talked about had an influence on me a long time ago, about the really heavy-duty workouts, right? Or blood and guts from Dorian Yates, where you did something incredibly high intensity, sometimes one set. And not just one set to failure, but one set to and through failure with forced negative reps. People actually spotting the positive and allowing yourself to have to control the negative. A high degree of intensity. Then you've got sort of down this end of the spectrum here, you've got these very low intensity but high volume workouts. And that could be like the old-fashioned bodybuilder magazines that I mentioned in some previous videos, where they were doing 9 exercises and 4 sets apiece, and it's like 36 sets. But again, you could take out even some of the use of steroids that those guys were popular for using. You can still get some results on that. A lot of guys follow that. Natural guys follow those routines. But what I think you have to go right from there is realize that we can manipulate these variables and sort of settle somewhere more here in the middle, which is where I think the X marks the spot, where it's the sweet spot for us. Because though it's not incredibly on the highest end of the intensity scale, or it's not on the highest end of the volume scale, it settles in here, and what I think you gain in this area is longevity. Right? The ability to sustain this. So to see results over the long term without any of the repercussions that might come from some of these other approaches. Because we know that as we continue to accrue more and more and more and more volume, we also accrue a lot of times, because of the lower intensity level down here, more junk volume. In an effort to get to what I call those effective reps, you are wasting a lot of repetitions. And the junk isn't just throwaway. It's not like, okay, it's not going to hurt me, but it's not helping me. No, it can hurt you, because the more junk volume you do, the more of those rotations on the tire that you get, especially on those ball and socket joints in the shoulder and the hip, that become detrimental over time. I can tell you firsthand, having the torn labrum in my shoulder and rotator cuff, that continue to just do more and more repetitions and movement of the joint isn't the best approach. I want to be economical with the reps I do. I want to veer more towards intensity. Now, another question to ask yourself, if you have any orthopedic issues like I do, and yours are more of the type of, let's say, low back pain or knee pain or ankle pain, those are more subjected to compressive forces. So if the intensity was higher in those areas, that might cause more of a problem in those areas. Your low back would become more inflamed. You'd have more issues with low back pain. In that case, I might more veer a little bit lower on the intensity and higher on the volume. So lots of different factors go into what gets you here into the sweet spot. And as I said in the beginning, whether you're a beginner or advanced, you have to manipulate this as well, because if you're a beginner, you don't necessarily need to train with as many sets, number one, with as much volume. You certainly don't need to train with as much intensity. You don't need to take it all the way to and through failure as much, because you're still getting the benefits of that neurological efficiency that's building on the earlier side of your lifting career, right? Which produces more of those newbie gains, especially in strength. with the size to follow. So you don't have to do that as much. But if you're a seasoned lifter, you need to go up in one of these two areas because the seasoned lifter's reaction and response to training stimulus is blunted. They need to do a little bit more in order to get that effect. So what do we do? So I have an example of something that I think is going to be very helpful for you. I didn't want to just show you the rationale, but what would it look like in practice? So for instance, we would start with a big 3 exercise, right? In this case, it's a push workout, right? PPL, so we have a bench press. You do, let's say, a typical 3x5, because this is a good strength building spot, and I'll get into a secondary benefit of it as well when we talk about these. But a 3x5 at 80% for, let's say, the novice, 85% more of the intermediate lifter, and you can even shift over to an RPE, in this case an 8, when you're talking about more advanced lifters. And I actually mentioned the whole concept of RPE before, especially as it relates to hypertrophy in beginners. I'm not a huge fan of it at all, but in a strength application, it could be incredibly useful, especially in the advanced lifter. I'm a big believer that this is really supposed to be reserved more for advanced lifters. Others disagree with me on this, that's fine, but I think that this is a technique that you have to have an understanding of your own exertion. You have to be able to monitor what real failure is like so that you can back off to an 8. Most beginner lifters have no sense, not only of body awareness and proprioception, but their ability to exert effort, and therefore wind up performing an RPE 8, which is too shy, and wind up being 5 shy because they have no ability of what their own body is capable of. So I reserve it more for people on this end. But again, you scale that, then you come into this sort of secondary part of the workout. And here I like to incorporate a couple more of the basic compound moves because we know those are good for building our foundational strength and improving upon them, but they also give us a chance here to work in the high tension range, loading up with exercises that will get you in the 4 to 6 range, even if you leave 1 or 2 in the tank. And for our beginners, they leave 2 in the tank or 2 RIR, and then the more advanced guys 1. The idea here, though, is that we don't even have to go to failure on these heavy exercises. And I just covered this in a brand new video that I did that you're going to want to check out, where I talked about the different rep ranges and why you want to shift your focus a little bit. When you're in the really high rep ranges, then pushing 2 in through failure is actually mandatory if you want to see a growth response. But when you're in these lower rep ranges and you're using heavier weights, you're getting the additional benefit of tension to drive up those gains. So you don't necessarily need to train to failure there. And that's what we basically take advantage of. We have an overhead press and a close grip bench press, like good solid exercises to allow you to get all the benefits we're talking about. But the reason why we put them here is because we go into a technique here, a drop set, that's going to require quick transitions between the portions of the set, right, of the drop set itself. And if we were doing big barbell lifts here, like an overhead press or close grip bench press, you're not going to be able to make that transition quick enough unless someone's stripping your plates, and even then, probably not fast enough to see the real benefits of the drop set in terms of raising the intensity level of your output. So I kind of use these as like non-strippable exercises in this second spot. Beginners don't even have to do both of them. A beginner could actually just stick with the overhead press and leave one and not have to do them both. Again, we don't have to do as much volume on the beginner side. In these I call these high intensity drop sets, and these are the 50 version. And what we do is we basically are dropping 50% of the weight between the first set and the second part of it, and then we're trying to do something with that. So again, in the first set, you can load up with some of that higher weight so you get that benefit of tension. And then when you drop to 50%, your goal is to double the repetitions that you just did. So if I did 3 to 5, let's say I did 4 in the first portion of the set with 1 RIR, and I doubled it. Well, now I'm looking to get like 8, right? Now it brings me to a total repetition range of about 13. But what I do here is I'm getting in that 8 range. And again, if you watch that video I talked about, once you start to get past, let's say 5 repetitions, and you're now into like 6, 7, more like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-ish in that area, then what you want to do is you really have to start taking those sets closer to failure, if not all the way to failure. And the way I like to sort of term that is form failure. Right? Form failure is when you just can't perform another repetition in good form. Right? You get to the point where you're not completing the repetition with the same speed, with the same mechanics. It just doesn't look like the exercise you were doing before. So you should stop. And that probably leaves a little bit of effort in the tank, but it's still a good hard effort. Because when we get to the next drop set here, you do a weight that's slightly lighter, 6 to 10 is where you're starting, and then when you do your 50% drop on that, and this is a crossover in the first one here for our chest, we do a 50% drop, at that point, now you're trying to double the repetition. So let's say we landed at 10 even. If I went from 10, now I want to double that, I want to get 20 in the second half with 50% of the weight. But we've now entered on that set of 20, we've entered into that range where all the research points to the fact that we need to be incredibly hard in our effort here. We need to take this to and through failure. And what we're talking about here is what we say is mechanical failure. You can get a little bit of cheat, you can get a little bit ugly here, but because the weight is light, it's actually not really posing too much of a risk to your body. It's pretty safe, but you're going all the way to the point where you just can't move the weight anymore. And that's a good spot to be when you're that light of a weight and that light of load. And then of course you go back for a third set, but again, I wouldn't have everybody do this. I'd have the beginner start with just the first set. These other two could be standard, 6 to 10, form failure, done. Get those additional benefits of more tension, which is again, early driver of strength and size anyway. The more advanced guy could come in for set 2, right, the intermediate guy, and then the really advanced guy would do all 3 of these as drop sets. And the time it takes to do these is actually pretty efficient. So I would do that with the crossover. I would do it again for, again, this is a pushing workout, so I come back with something I could do for triceps, in this case one of my favorite, overhead tricep extension that you're seeing here. And of course I would come back with something for the shoulders, and one of the best exercises you could do is a dumbbell side lateral raise, working on the middle delt. And also I can do this in a run the rack fashion, so I can quickly transition between one weight and the next in the drop set. Now, what I always like to do, just as part of ATHLEAN-X training, is I like to usually come in with some kind of goal-oriented training, right? We have a finisher that we would do here, and in this case, it's a 5-minute AMRAP to see how many push-ups you can do. And again, at body weight, if you're a beginner, if you're a little bit more advanced, you put 25 pounds on your back or strap in a weight vest, or 45 pounds if you're more advanced. And the concept here is just to sort of give yourself some way to A, speed up what you slow down. A lot of times, a lot of controlled lifting is slow. And I think athletically, we want to speed up what we slow down in a workout. And it also gives me an objective goal to shoot for, so the next time I come back and do that, I can try to get more repetitions than I did the last time. I like tapping into the inner competitiveness of people, and that's a great way to do it. And then we're always going to do our corrective exercises. Not because they're not important and we're putting them down here. They're incredibly important. That's why they appear in ATHLEAN-X training programs. As a physical therapist, I realize how important corrective exercises are to making the whole rest of this thing easier. And if you don't believe me, just start doing them. If you start doing corrective exercises, in this case, just external rotation, it's a great way to strengthen muscles that you oftentimes overlook. And when we get to the lower body, a lot of our exercises are done in the sagittal plane, and we're completely missing the benefits of the hip rotators. They need to be in there. We need to strengthen them. And as you strengthen the whole, the unit gets strong from your toes to the top of your head. Because of the kinetic chain has the ability to do that, and we need to figure out a way to actually incorporate those into the things we do, and therefore they're part of our workout. They're not just an afterthought. But the bottom line here, guys, is that when we're looking at volume, the questions you have to ask yourself are going to gear you towards your level of ability from beginner to intermediate to advanced, and then those other issues about orthopedic concerns of what you might be dealing with and where you might be dealing with them, and whether you're using something or you're not using something, or whether you have a lot of training experience or you don't, or whether you have a lot of time in the gym or you don't. Because again, remember we talked about time. If you only have 30 minutes to train, then you're not going to be looking for these really high volume workouts. They're just going to have drag time along with it. What you're going to need to do is look closer to the intensity side of things. And if you're having issues that, or you just, let's plain out call it what it is, you suck at bringing it in your workouts, you just don't have a good high intensity level, then you really probably shouldn't be trying to bring it too much, because it's not going to do any good. And you want to look more towards the volume side of things. But most importantly, you want to find that area that puts you here and keeps you here the longest, because this is where sustainability and longevity in training is going to be. Any of these approaches will work. There's so many things that will work. There really are. That's why the research is all over the place, because the studies show a lot of different things. There's meta-analysis that show all kinds of things, dotting around what's most effective. But the answer for you is going to be, what is it going to do for you long term in the course of a plan, in the course of 3 months, in the course of 3 years, in the course of 30 years? You need to figure out where that zone is, and I'm telling you, the zone for most people is going to be in this sweet spot. And as I said, in our BEAST program, PPL, you're going to find that this is where we land almost all the time, right here in the sweet spot. And because of it, the program is damn good. You can find it over at ATHLEAN-X.com. If you found the video helpful, make sure you leave your comments and thumbs up below. If you want me to cover something else, make sure you leave it in the comments, guys. If you haven't done so, click subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video when we put one out. All right, guys, see you soon.